Hey, you see that peak on the horizon, towering over the land? A summit of ideas as much as it is a tangible physical space? The platonic ideal of a destination that you thought could only remain afar? You can go there, if you want. You can seek your fortune or the answers to something vital, the burden of discovery on your shoulders by your design. It's not going to be an easy journey. You will have to face tough terrain, fearsome weather, dangerous wildlife, and even then, even if you manage to survive all that, what lies in wait might not be the thing you were searching for. It might be something more. Monolith Soft has something of a reputation when it comes to building impeccable game worlds, and more than most, it's a reputation well earned. The original Xenoblade Chronicles offered players a staggeringly expansive space to explore, and was followed by a number of equally impressive sequels, not to mention their work with Nintendo EPD on Breath of the Wild, which, well, it speaks for itself. These environments are worthy of attention not only because they use their scale to invite the player rather than simply intimidate them, but the creative use of verticality and blocking to build pockets of intrigue meant that each of the worlds on offer gave us a reason to dig deeper, often with the reward being more experiential than tangible. A lesser appreciated aspect of this design, however, is what they do to populate these spaces, a series of choices that make these locales feel more organic, less gamey. And to illustrate this point, I want to talk about perhaps the weirdest entry in their oeuvre. I've been playing the Switch remaster of Xenoblade Chronicles X. It's a funny bugger of a game. A bold and brash spiritual successor that at first glance seems utterly content to throw the baby out with the bathwater. A litany of creative decisions made that feel like a far cry from the expectation handed down by that exemplary, iconic predecessor. When you spend a little time with the game, though, what Xenoblade Chronicles X actually is, as an entry in a now established series and as a difficult sophomore hit, is a continuation of the design principles of that original game, only to a more holistic extreme. If you're not familiar with the setup, here's a one-sentence summary. You are stranded on an alien planet following the destruction of Earth, and you have to help ensure the continued survival of the human race. There's a little more going on than just that, but you get the basic gist. What this means for the gameplay loop is that you will be venturing out into the wilds, exploring, setting up data probes, collecting materials, and culling the local fauna. Missions have multiple flavours, from moving the story along to unlocking new allies and abilities to straightforward fetch quests and kill X amount of Y hunts. At first it's frequently repetitive and very MMO coded, but the way it fits these well-worn ideas into the narrative is surprisingly immersive. The story of Xenoblade Chronicles X is all about survival, and it's a tale about your own place as a cog within a much larger machine, reflected wholesale in its pacing, mission structure, and how much grunt work you are expected to do in the process. This is the thing that will likely be a sticking point for many players. The amount of repetition in the early game is remarkably audacious, but also, I would argue, entirely justified. When you start out, you are but a rookie. The people running the show do not know you, and you have to prove yourself. Someone has to go out and do the dirty work, all those shitty boring tasks that keep the world running and everyone within it safe. Why wouldn't it be you? To add a bit of spice to the mix, however, and to ensure that the game doesn't render itself into a frictionless slog, what goes on in this world is far from the norm. In certain regards, this is quite a traditional role-playing game, in that the degree of challenging combat encounters is largely determined by the player's level versus their opponents. There is a bit of wiggle room to allow for some supreme David and Goliath moments, as well as, on the other side of the coin, the Tyrant-class foes packing a much bigger punch comparative to their numerical prowess. But for the most part, if you are, say, level 20 and your opponent is also level 20, you're probably going to get on just fine during a fight. Normally, in an RPG, J or otherwise, you'd have a steady curve throughout the game world, the level cap for each area reflecting the quest from journeyman to messianic figurehead. Your starter areas replete with pathetic little whelks designed to slowly indoctrinate the player into the standard gameplay loop. The end game locations full of the nastiest bastards on the planet, each encounter demanding a pure and total understanding of the game rules in order to best them. As you can probably grok from the footage I'm using for this video, this isn't really the case in Xenoblade Chronicles X. The numbers out on the plains of Mirror, they're all over the place. There are essentially no starter areas and very few explicitly endgame ones. The moment you step out from your home base of New LA, you will see those ratty little bugs that can be dropped in seconds, sure, but in that same cone of vision, also towering indigens 10 times your level. Big Jurassic Park vibes. Even after the dozenth time you encounter one of these towering monstrosities, it's really something special. And to me, it indicates a very specific design principle about how the developers want you to engage with this game. You venture out into a world that is not yours to conquer, and you find its residents wholly reluctant to cater to your needs. There are layers to this. Some of these creatures are docile, while others most certainly are not. The hostile entities respond to your presence either on the basis of sight or sound, and if you're not careful, something nasty can come bounding over the horizon to stop you dead in your tracks. There have been countless times where I've been neck deep in a mission, locked blades in mortal combat with a venerable foe, only to be snapped in half by a gargantuan beast who just happened to stroll by at the wrong moment. Is this annoying? Definitely. But it's hard to be mad about it for too long, as the game's ample checkpoint system drops you back into the action with little delay, and the experience of this is genuinely thrilling. With these alterations to the conventions of the genre, what this means for your time out in the world is that you cannot become complacent. You need to keep a constant eye on your surroundings, and because of these more lethal outliers, your path to your objectives sometimes is not as straightforward as the crow flies. This has two interesting effects. The first is that, for a game that's all about travelling to specific places on the map to do something, it makes that journey a question of how, not how long. And for reasons that will become apparent later in this video, even independent of these extremely dangerous entities in your path, it's often not a straightforward answer. This in turn demands attention from the player in a way that a lot of open world games don't manage. A thoughtfulness to how you proceed through the landscape and what you need to avoid in order to stay safe on your journey. The second is that the end result of exploration, those experiential pockets of delight, sometimes come by accident. Regularly was it the case that I stumbled into an area, be that a dense cave formation or a gorgeous vista, simply because I was running away Scooby-Doo style from a high-level monster that had caught my scent on the wind. Sometimes even this outcome resulted in a solution to the more static topographical obstacles in the world, the revelation of an ancillary path delivering me from that grief. I think this is a brilliant wrinkle in the conventional world design paradigm. Exploration through aversion rather than raw curiosity. Falling into experiences in an almost emergent manner. It has the same outcome, you find something cool in the world, but it makes that world feel all the more fantastical for it, that these instances weren't simply placed there for you to find, but that they existed independent of your presence at all. It evokes brilliantly some of the best moments in adventure films, Land of the Lost, Skull Island, those memorable sequences in which hapless heroes stumble through untamed frontiers into a perfect moment of celluloid beauty. True art through the lens of happenstance. This is the feeling I've had on multiple occasions during my time with this game. It's because of this that I am confident in saying that these higher level foes are not encounters placed haphazardly across the world for flavour, but rather intentional aspects of the world design itself, as essential to the skyline as any mountain or chasm. In the original Xenoblade Chronicles, there was an inkling of this outside-the-box thinking. Every region had areas within it with enemies of a much higher level than those surrounding them, but there was a golden path, through which you could follow the game's story on a challenging but steady difficulty incline. The goal there, as I understood it, was to present the world as something more than a vessel for your specific adventure, but that element of design was largely segregated. It wasn't a puzzle to figure out where to go next, it was something to return to when you were feeling a bit more bold. Here, in the world of Mirror, we have an exciting jumble of threats to make each journey feel like an arduous trek into the heart of the storm. No matter where you go, there's a voice in the back of your head telling you to watch out. And it makes sense. Because in this situation, where through no fault of your own, you are the alien interloper, this place is not a theme park. Exploration is the whole point of the game, not just an accoutrement to the golden path, and the world has not been built with you in mind. This is not just in terms of the threat level from the local populace, but also how the scale of topography intentionally blocks off parts of the map from standard traversal. As mentioned, sometimes you can get around these obstacles through investigating the surrounding areas, but ultimately you cannot get everywhere by foot. It would not make sense to be able to do so, and in turn this allows the game to dangle an extremely enticing carrot before you. So, you might be aware, with a brief glance at the cover art, that Xenoblade Chronicles X is a mech game. The mobile suits in question are called Skells, and you see them around everywhere, wandering the streets of New LA, out in the field, making short work of dangerous indigents, covering huge stretches of land in a matter of seconds. They are a fundamental drive of the United Government Forces Blade Division, a tool for the ages. You don't get one for bloody ages. Some 30 hours into my current playthrough of the game, I have only just received my first Skell, something I had to really earn through not only demonstrating my worth in the field, but by completing 8 whole exams in order to receive my license. It's a bit of a watershed moment for the game. Again, independent of context, this is a baffling choice, to let the player wallow in mediocrity for so many hours before giving them even a crumb of the sublime, but it is wholly effective. Building up the player's sense of progression, bolstering your understanding of the world beyond the simplicity of number go up. When you get to your first Skell, the world suddenly gets both bigger and smaller. Things that once towered over you suddenly feel surmountable, and areas previously locked off by mountainous terrain can now be scaled in a single, booster-enabled leap. It's not an infinite venture of generosity right off the bat. Your Skell is still limited in certain regards. There are still parts of the world you cannot reach, and as I understand it, there is another great push to prove yourself worthy of unlocking a more potent aerial model somewhere down the line, probably with more bloody exams, no doubt. I'm nearly 40, you know. I thought that part of my life was well and truly over. My experience of finally unlocking my Skell was quite amazing, in that almost immediately as I ventured out into this brave new world in my meticulous lethal mech, I got one-shot by one of the same megafauna I was so desperately trying to avoid while on foot. My hulking mass of metal, hydraulics, missiles, and a beam katana was no match for the raw feral energy of this terrestrial moving mountain. In the moment, I said something God will not forgive, already pissed off at how long it had taken me to get to that point. But the further away from that initial bursting of the bubble I get, the more I've come to appreciate what a perfect piece of comedy that really was. That's hubris as a game mechanic. I learned an incredibly valuable lesson that day. Your weapon, your vehicle, a step up the chain of power, but not an immutable bulwark. You have to be really bloody careful, because should it end up destroyed, it doesn't dump you back at the last checkpoint as it does when you're on foot. That thing is totaled, and you have to return to base to grovel to your insurance provider to get it replaced. Yeah, that's the true power fantasy right there, isn't it? Thundering about an untamed wilds, a growing anxiety in the back of your head about your no claims bonus really makes you feel like a hero. Again, and I must stress this point to the nth degree, this makes sense in the context of everything the game is trying to evoke. Of course the Skells aren't a cure for all that ails you. Over the previous 30 hours it had been drummed into me time and time again that these machines are just as fallible as I was. What do you think happened to create all those Skell wreckages you encountered as you explored Mirror in pursuit of your goals? Why do you think Blade keeps posting quests to rescue pilots or procure materials to repair battered carapaces? There's a completeness to all proceedings in Xenoblade Chronicles X that is the key to understanding what makes it tick. It's a game about its world. It's a world about the game. The overarching story, what little there is of it, directly relates to both of these things. While there is an encroaching discovery of a big bad and a greater threat to pursue, this is fed to you briefly and with sizable gaps between. The requirements to access the main story missions demand that you engage with the game's copious side content, so much so that it blurs the lines of that golden path amicably. What you end up doing for much of these ancillary flights of fancy also directs you back to those core gameplay loops, emergently, diegetically. Much of what you engage with in this game is familiar to anyone who's played a JRPG or MMO from the last 20 years, but here, nothing feels flippant. Your fellow survivors are trapped in the same loops of subsistence, hunting valuable materials, seeking out missing friends, looking for gullible young rooks to test out experimental weaponry in the field. We are all in this together, and we are entrusting our own futures with one another. It's for this reason that many of the game's design quirks, choices myself and many of my peers have no doubt lambasted in other titles, feel perfectly at home here. And a consequence of this is that Xenoblade's weirder elements also draw breath from that same pair of lungs. Things like the hyper-capitalist economy rubbing up against the sense of impending danger that makes up this society's central mission. Salvation for all who still remain is nothing compared to the sacred oath of quarterly profit forecasts. But it is that same maximalist evil that provides you with the tools with which you can attack and dethrone the gods of this chaotic frontier. Hell, you can even invest in these corporate entities yourself to unlock new gear. It's really fucked up, but once again, it makes sense. It all makes sense because there is a unified creative vision for the game. And I know from my own artistic endeavours how hard it is to stay disciplined in that regard. You get an idea and you want to add it regardless of whether the shoe fits. There's nothing of the sort to be found here. When I think about my time so far with Xenoblade Chronicles X, I have perhaps the most mixed feelings of my life. It's beyond fascinating as a thing to rub up against, more so for the fact that for the first dozen hours or so I was ready to chalk this up as a bad sequel and move on to something else. I took long breaks from playing it, through which I discovered that I could not stop thinking about it. I really loved the original Xenoblade Chronicles, but it's barely crept back into my mind since I hit the credits. For this weird and wonderful sequel, before I've got anywhere near the grand finale, it's occupied enough of my mind to warrant a full video essay. This was supposed to be a short. Look what obsession gets you. So there is a question I have to ask myself when I take stock of all things Xenoblade. Is it fun? And the answer is not always. I've spent many an evening spitting bile at my Switch as I get caught out by the chaos of the wild time and time again. The repetition, the tedium and the ungodly slog it takes to get anywhere with anything flicks masochistically between unbearable and strangely therapeutic. It's not something I can play for more than an hour at a time, but it's also something I find myself coming back to again and again. Is it brilliant? It might just be. A holistic entity that truly commits to its identity in a way that many like-minded titles struggle to. Beyond anything else, I still find the whole endeavour dangerously compelling. This is what games should be.